Okay, we're rolling.
Okay. This is an interview at Days Inn, Hicksville, New York, on the 24th of June, 2003. The interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Walter A. Trenkle. I was born December 28th, 1925.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to military service?
Well, I graduated high school. I went to Sewanaka High School in Floral Park. I graduated in 1942. I went to work for a bank in New York for a year, and then all my friends and colleagues were drafted, so I enlisted in the Navy.
I'm going to ask two questions. One, do you recall where you were and your feelings when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I know exactly where I was. We were visiting my grandmother, who lived in the Bronx at the time. And I was lying on the floor playing with some coasters that they kept for us kids to fool around with, and the report came over the radio.
How did you feel about this when you heard the news?
It didn't make a tremendous impact on me because I had never heard of Pearl Harbor before that, and it didn't mean a lot to me at the time. I guess I was 14 at the time.
Okay. Now, when you enlisted in the Navy, why did you pick the Navy?
Well, actually, my first choice was the Marine Corps, but I didn't pass the eye exam for the Marine Corps, and then subsequently one of my classmates from high school who had gone in the Navy had been home on leave, and I was talking to him, and he was in the hospital corps in the Navy. And that sounded like a good idea to me, that if I went in the hospital corps I could learn how to install and repair x-ray machines, and it would be a good career for me afterwards. So I decided, well, I'll go in the Navy and see if I can get in the hospital corps.
Okay.
Little did I know at the time that the hospital corpsmen were being killed off at such a rate that it was very easy to get in the hospital corps.
Where did you go for your training?
I went to boot camp in Newport, Rhode Island.
Now, you went in 43. Did you have beds or did you have hammocks? The gentleman that was in previously said they had hammocks.
We had double-decker bunk beds. There were two sections of the Newport boot training area. One was called the Island, which was the old section, and were permanent brick buildings. And the other area, which they called the Point, was Quonset huts, and they may very well have had the hammocks there.
Okay. What kind of training did you have there? Was just the basics, or did you have any advanced
Yeah,
training?
it was the basic Navy training, and we learned how to row boats and fire rifles and march, and learned that this was a bulkhead and not a wall, and similar type things.
Okay. Hey, you ever been away from home prior to this?
Boy Scout camp, and that was it.
Okay. When did you receive more advanced training as a Navy corpsman?
Well,
medical training?
the boot camp was 6 weeks, And then we had a leave at the end of that, and when my leave was over, I went directly down to the Portsmouth Naval Hospital campus, which was in the Norfolk, Virginia area, and that's where the hospital corps school was, in Portsmouth. So that was, I believe, a 6-week training period again. We were, it was a separate school where they trained hospital corpsmen.
What were some of the things that you were taught there?
Well, we learned first aid and minor surgery, which was just basic wound care type of techniques. Another course was materia medica, where we learned about various drugs and things, and nursing care, how to take care of patients who were disabled and bedridden.
Did you think the training was adequate at the time?
Yes, to prepare us for our next step, which was to work in a hospital, where we worked under, the supervision of nurses, and we got further experience there, and we could go on to further specialization in the hospital corps, which I did. I went on to become an operating room technician in my hospital training, which was at Brooklyn Naval Hospital, which suited me just fine because I could get home every weekend, and I did well on all the exams because in the hospital corps, maybe in other areas as well, but to my knowledge, the hospital corps, we took periodic exams, which if we didn't take them and didn't pass them, we didn't get out on liberty. But I did very well on the exams, and I had come to the attention of the director of the education office, so that when I applied for the operating room training, which was a 6-month period of training, which meant I was going to stay in Brooklyn for 6 months at least. So I got immediately accepted to that and spent the next 6 months training in Brooklyn.
Okay, could you explain some of your duties there?
Well, what we did was essentially what a nurse would do in a civilian hospital. In the operating room, we sterilized instruments, cleaned instruments, sharpened instruments, because in those days you didn't have disposable needles and knife blades and things like that, so we had to clean and sharpen them, have them ready for the next surgery. And then we would also, during the operation, pass instruments to the surgeon. I guess this is where I really got my full taste of medicine, and thought that, gee, this is something I'd like to do after I got out of the Navy.
What kind of operations or surgery did they do? Were these combat related?
Very few were combat related. It was a major naval hospital, and people who needed surgery for one reason or another were transferred to the Brooklyn Naval Hospital. The other one in the nearby area was St. Albans Hospital, where I think they got more of the combat related surgery.
Okay, after your 6 months there, where did you go?
Well, actually, I ended up being there for about 10 months altogether. And then well, I guess the sequence was I was selected to go in this new hospital unit that they had established called Corps Evacuation Hospital. And there were three Corps Evacuation Hospitals, and I was in Corps Evacuation Hospital 3. And we went down to Camp Lejeune to train, and we were equipped with Marine Corps uniforms, and we went through another basic training type of thing that was more attuned to field activity, such as the Marines had. And we were in a separate part of Camp Lejeune, which was actually separate from the Marines themselves, an area called Tank Park. One time, apparently, tank units trained there, and these were smaller, temporary buildings. And I can't remember exactly how long we were there.
Was the training a lot tougher than your regular Navy basic training?
Well, it was more physical.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I guess we developed more Marine Corps type attitudes rather than the strictly medical attitudes we had before. It was a very unusual outfit because there were Seaman Guard who were in our unit, and they also were put in Marine Corps uniforms, Marine training. We had various types of Navy artificers, steam fitters, electricians' mates, carpenters' mates. So it was strictly a Navy unit, but we were attached to the Marine Corps, and we had Navy rates in Marine Corps colors.
Mm-hmm.
And from there we were shipped to Camp Pendleton, California, which is where we first were introduced to our thousands of tons of equipment. And we had to move it from one place to the next and stencil it with each move. And at this particular point, we were in Camp Pendleton, which was Oceanside, and we had to go every morning to San Diego, to the Marine Corps barracks where all our equipment was. It initially came with no markings attributed to our unit, and we had to do this stenciling, and each time it was stenciled, it got moved from one place to another, including these ward tents, which weighed over 400 pounds, and they were hard to grab a hold of. And it would take 4 of us to move one, but it was difficult because you couldn't hold it. And there were also these big boxes full of supplies, and the one unit I remember most clearly was a Unit 17, which was filled with cots and ward equipment, and they were the biggest and heaviest of the boxes. At that time, I was a pharmacist mate 3rd class, and although it was a non-commissioned officer rank, we did the stevedore work. It was only the pharmacist mates 1st class and above who did the stenciling and the bookkeeping and the easier type jobs. The rest of us were all longshoremen.
Where did you go after Pendleton?
Well, we boarded ship in San Diego. I guess it must have been in the San Diego Naval facility. We went down by truck and went right on board ship. We didn't stay there at all. And then we headed out into the Pacific Ocean, and after about a day's travel on board ship, all of a sudden we turned around and we're heading back the other way at full speed, and we found out that we had had a torpedo fired at us, and we were getting away as fast as we could. But we didn't get hit, so...
So you left in a single ship? There was no convoy, or...?
No, we were a single ship. And it was named the Sea Witch. And as far as we were concerned, which really applied to it. We were on board with a load of Marines as well. It was a transport ship. And we had, matter of fact, took me years to ever eat chili again, because we had chili con carne twice a day, and we only had 2 meals a day, so that was it. And the seamen who ran the ship were not Navy; they were Merchant Marine, and their mess hall was on deck, so we could look in through the windows and see what they were eating. And it wasn't chili con carne. They used to toss pancakes out the window to watch us fight for them. We were on board the Sea Witch when it was the Marine Corps birthday. I forget which birthday it was, but anyway, because we were essentially all Marines at that time, they had a special meal for the Marine Corps birthday, and I think it was turkey or chicken or something other than chili con carne. It was the one thing that made us happy to be with the Marines.
Now, how did the regular Marines treat you guys, knowing that you guys were like Navy and Marine Corps uniform? Were you considered like outsiders or part of the Marine Corps group?
Well, we were part, but not really all the way. And we used to tease each other back and forth all the time. I remember one thing, we used to tease the Marines and say, "Oh, been in the Marine Corps 20 years and I'm PFC. My brother, he's smart, he's corporal." And needless to say, that didn't particularly please them. But we never got into any physical combat with each other or anything like that. It was just the bantering back and forth. We were attached to the 3rd Amphibious Corps, which was the actual Marine base that we were attached to. Wherever we went after that, we were somewhere close to a 3rd Amphibious Corps unit. The most common one was the Amphibious Tank Corps. They had a logo of Ace of Spades. So we used to always look for the Ace of Spades and know where we were going to end up. We stopped in Pearl Harbor for mail and I guess instructions, but we never got ashore. The only ones who got ashore are the guys who went ashore to get mail. And they brought back some hamburgers from ashore, which they and their friends had, but the rest of us didn't get.
Now, at that point in time, was the attack on Pearl Harbor still fairly evident? I mean,
Oh yes, the
with the sunken ships and
the debris was there. We didn't get around to see everything because we were just on this ship where it was anchored in the harbor itself. We didn't get into any of the dockage areas.
Where did you go from Pearl Harbor?
Well, from Pearl Harbor we went to Guadalcanal. Now, by this time the fighting was over on Guadalcanal, but there was still evidence of it. Ships that had been sunken were lying in the shallow water, and we got our first taste of indigenous peoples. There were these black natives who put lime or something in their hair to make it a reddish yellow color, and they didn't know too much about U.S. money, but everything was $1, $2, $3. They knew that much, and we were fresh out from the States. We were buying souvenirs galore, and they were well aware of that. They came around with their goods to sell. Mm-hmm. But that's where we was our staging area. There were more permanent type of situations there. There was Fleet Hospital, I believe it was Fleet Hospital 108, and some of us who had specialties went to Fleet Hospital 108 to work there in our own business while we were there. And as an operating room technician, I was sent to Fleet Hospital 108 and worked in the operating room there. Now there's where we saw the combat injuries. If I recall correctly, we had gotten a shipment of casualties from the Peleliu campaign while I was there. And in those days, all extremity injuries with fractures and everything were in casts. And they had gotten their first treatment somewhere else, and they were in a cast, and the drainage had gotten on the cast, and you could smell the convoys coming in before you could actually see them. And we did a lot of cleaning up of wounds and reapplying casts. I got some practice in how to make the plaster of Paris bandages, because at that time Johnson & Johnson was just getting started making the pre-packaged plaster of Paris rolls, and they weren't quite perfected yet. They weren't really great because the water, they would roll too tight and the water wouldn't get inside to the very middle, and there was a lot of wastage because of that. But mostly we made our own, and they were the ones that were best for our usage. But we lived in our own camp, and naturally we got to re-stencil everything and move it from here to there and there and then back again. That seemed to be our main occupation, was moving these thousands of tons of equipment. And we hadn't the slightest idea where we were going, what we were going to do. We were called an evacuation hospital, so we figured we were going to do something in a hospital line. We were there for, it must have been 6 months or more. And from, actually it was a pretty nice place to be. And I even had pipe dreams of a resort being built there after the war, because the water was so nice and warm. We had compulsory swimming, but most of us would stay in the water up until the last call for chow, because the swimming was before mealtime.
You didn't have to worry about sharks or anything like that?
No, we didn't have to worry about any sharks or... Oh, sharks! No, there were no sharks that we knew of. They may have been there and they didn't tell us, but actually I think the large mass of people in the water would have chased the sharks away anyhow. But we left there and went on board a ship which was called an AKA, which stood for attack cargo something or other. And we were at sea when a typhoon came up, and later we heard that it was a typhoon and what was going on, but it got terribly rough. And I was fortunate, I never got seasick. To this day I have never been seasick. And there were guys who were deathly sick, and they'd be on the chow line and go running for the deck and on the rail, and we were very happy to eat their meals if they had already gotten the meal and then got up and left. But that was a couple of days of terrible weather. At one point we were reduced to eating sandwiches. That was the only thing they could make. And then finally we got to Okinawa. We finally found out where we were going, but when we found out where we were going, we still didn't know where we were. And it was April 1st, which happened to be Easter Sunday that year, that the assault on Okinawa took place. And because of my OR technician rating, I was transferred to an LST that was converted to be a hospital ship, and it was called an LSTH. And I was on that April 1st, and they brought casualties directly on board the LSTH from the beach. They were able to open the hangar deck, the doors, the tank deck doors, and drive right up with the casualties in it. And we had the operating rooms going full blast then.
What was your reaction to casualties that had just come off the beach as opposed to some that had been treated like when you were at Guadalcanal? The ones from Peleliu probably had much more treatment, didn't they, by the time they reached you?
Yeah, well, it was on Guadalcanal, what we were doing was more definitive treatment. This was the immediate treatment of the wounds. And well, as an operating room technician, I had seen plenty of open wounds, so yeah, I wasn't shocked by it or anything. And we did have courses in anatomy, so that didn't dissect cadavers in hospital corps school. We did have books with diagrams and things like that. So it was pretty much a routine situation, just that there were so much more.
What kind of hours did you work? I mean, were you guys working like 18 hours a day, or?
Well, actually, we were only on board that for the first day, because later on that day, our hospital unit went ashore. So this was all pre-planned, and they were anticipating much more resistance than we had. We landed on the northern part of the island, and the Japanese had concentrated their defenses on the southern part. And we were destined to set up our evacuation hospital next to the Yantan airfield, which was up in the northern part of the island. So when the Marines got ashore so easily, we were able to go ashore the first day and start setting up our hospital. And I remember it was rainy, and we were working in the rain trying to set up these tents and get things going. And I had these autoclaves that ran on Coleman stoves to sterilize things. And I had made up some Vaseline gauze bandage, which I anticipated we were gonna need, and sure enough, the first casualties we got into our hospital were burns that we needed all the Vaseline gauze for. So it was a good choice. And after a while, I guess the Japanese found out we were there, and the fact that we were right next to Yantan airfield, I think, might have had something to do with that, because they used to come over and bomb the airfield every night. And we had built ourselves some pretty healthy shelters with sandbagged roofs, and so instead of getting up for every air raid and having to run for a shelter, we would stay in and sleep the night through. And one night, apparently what had happened is the Japanese plane had come over and dropped a stick of bombs, which may or may not have been destined for us, but two of them hit our ward tents. And troops who had gone there with minor injuries to have treatment and stayed overnight ended up with major injuries, because the bombs hit right in the middle of these ward tents. So we got very busy in the operating rooms again. Another interesting thing was, not too long before this, there had been a big play in the stateside papers about this explosive shell that was taken out of a Marine or soldier, I'm not sure which it was, and they had all these protective shields and everything up that the surgeons worked behind. But what was happening is Okinawa, at least, well, yeah, pretty much all of Okinawa had hills, and the firing from the ships out on the bay, when they would track a plane down, some of their weaponry would hit these hills, and troops who were on the hills would be subject to that. You know, instead of the shells going over the top of them lying down on the dirt, they were essentially in a more vertical position and would get hit. So we had we had a guy with an explosive shell who was brought into us, and this was in his back, right next to his spine, and it was wedged in next to the bone. And we have these instruments, bone holding forceps. And the one is called a lion jaw forceps because it had teeth that would grab and hold tight. So without any bulletproof glass or anything like that, our surgeons grabbed a hold of this thing with the lion jaw forceps and pulled it out. It was only after they got it out that they could see the markings on it, and it was recognized as being a explosive shell. So we lucked out on that. But we were there for a few months till the fighting was all over. And the reason we were placed there was so that troops who were brought into our hospital would then be taken directly up to the airport after treatment in our hospital and evacuated to hospitals like 108 and Guadalcanal, things like that. And we were set up. Okinawa had all these tombs, and each tomb would have a courtyard which had like arms coming out and forming walls in a courtyard area in front of the tomb. So these made great places to set up our operating rooms where they were at least partially protected by these walls. So we were set up there, and well, by this time they had made me the senior corpsman in the operating room, and I was running either 2 or 3 operating rooms. And we had also set up a central supply area to sterilize materials and distribute them throughout the hospital. And I had a friend who had been with me in Brooklyn Naval Hospital as well, and he ran the central supply area where he sterilized the stuff for the hospital in general and also for us. And that was another area that came under my purview. So after we were finally finished in Okinawa, we went back to Guam. And you'll never guess what we were doing in Guam. We were stenciling and moving supplies again, getting ready for the next campaign, which we understood was to set up a evacuation hospital on the beach in Japan. And it was while we were on Guam that we heard about the atomic bombs, and the war ended. So, knowing where we were supposed to go, we were very happy about the whole thing, and to this day I have no regrets about the atomic bomb. And we ultimately went to Japan and became part of the occupation force there in the island of Kyushu, which was the area where we were supposed to have been set up on the beach if we had invaded. And we were treated very well there. There was no problem with the Japanese at all. MacArthur did a tremendous job of managing the occupation there, and he had the full cooperation of the Japanese. We were welcomed into their homes, and there was even there was a telephone operator that worked in the hospital, and she had invited someone she worked with who was a friend of ours to come over to her house. And it was a kind of a duplex type. Her house was one half of the building, and the other half were a bunch of kamikaze pilots who had returned home and were having a party. And they were drinking sake, and they, came into our part of the house and offered us sake. And well, we weren't about to refuse. We figured we were in a pretty bad position right at that point. So we drank their sake, which tasted like gasoline to me. And we set up a hospital there, in a Japanese naval hospital in a place called Isahaya. And we had Japanese civilians working for us in the hospital, and we got the necessary things translated for us, although I got to learn the symbols for hot and cold water after a while. Became kind of necessary. And
Now, did you treat the Japanese people while you were there? You were there.
In general, we didn't. I don't know if there was another hospital there that was a civilian hospital or what. It was I'd say a big village rather than a small city. And there were restaurants that we went to in the village. And some of the guys even got girlfriends there. But it was a very, very, very good relationship that we had with the Japanese people. I remember my friend that was in Brooklyn Naval Hospital with me, and we went out into the countryside to get some eggs, some fresh eggs, because the powdered eggs that we got served just weren't that appetizing. We wanted some sunny side up eggs, and we were able to trade cigarettes for eggs with no problem. And we made friends with this one family, and we got eggs, and I even ended up being able to get a kimono to send home to my mother. But we would go there and visit, and I should have brought the pictures that he had given me. You did mention a picture. I brought a couple of pictures from myself.
Now, how long were you in Japan?
We were in Japan about 6 months. I know we went through a Christmas there.
Mm-hmm.
And then from Japan we came directly back to California and landed in Camp Pendleton. I remember the first thing I did when we got there is I went to the ship store and got a quart of ice cream. I ate the whole thing. That was one thing I really missed overseas with ice cream, and I got a little because the cooks were able to get some kind of a mix and make an ice cream after a fashion, and I had lots of medical alcohol, which they were very interested in acquiring, so I was able to trade the alcohol for ice cream. So I had ice cream once while we were, I'm not sure, I think it was on Okinawa.
Now, were you discharged from Camp Pendleton?
No, was sent back to the East Coast, and I was discharged at Lido Beach. And by that time, of course, I had made some telephone calls home, and my mother and father met me at the discharge facility in Lido Beach.
Did you, now I noticed you were in the Navy Reserve. When did you go into the Reserve?
Well, I went back again. I didn't sign up right then at discharge, but later on, during the course of my service, I had attained the rate of Pharmacist mate first class. And I figured, gee, if I have to go back in again, I'd like to go back in as Pharmacist mate first class, not start at the bottom of the ladder again. So I signed up in the reserve again, which turned out to be a mistake, because I was in medical school. I was in my first year of medical school when the Korean War broke out. And a pharmacist mate first class was qualified to be on independent duty on smaller ships. There would be no doctor or nurses or anything like that over him. He was the medical facility. Now I was a pharmacist mate first class, and they had these merchant ships that had been converted to the pocket aircraft carriers. And I got orders to go out on board the Guadalcanal as the pharmacist mate. Well, I was in my first year of medical school. If I left then, there was no way I was going to finish out on the Guadalcanal. So I had to apply for and get a commission as an ensign HP, which was really a non-existing situation. It was just something that kept me from going out on board ship until I finished my medical training. So in addition to going to medical school, I had to take correspondence courses on how to be a naval officer. And I managed to get through that all right and get through medical school. And when I finished medical school, I got a letter from the Navy Department saying I would have to accept a commission as Lieutenant JG in the Navy Medical Corps or resign. And after extreme soul searching for about 15 seconds, I resigned.
Let's go back a little bit. You told us your reaction to the dropping the atomic bombs. What about your reaction when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt? Do you recall your reaction to that?
Well, yeah, we heard about it, but it was just a fact. There was no big deal about it. We knew there was a vice president, and we didn't feel as though it was going to do us any great harm that he had died.
Did you use the GI Bill for medical school?
Yes.
Did you ever use the 5220 Club?
I used it for a couple of weeks, but it got very boring.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah, I joined the Catholic War Veterans, and I got to make some new friends in there.
Are you still a member, or you?
No, I've kind of dropped out. Once I finished medical school, I had so many other things to keep me busy. There was internship and residency, and then setting up a practice. And And of course, in the meantime, I met a girl and got married and raised a family. So I guess we kind of all drifted away from it.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that you had met in service?
The fella that I knew from Brooklyn Naval Hospital, he had seen, well, I guess I have to explain, my son was active with the America's Cup. He was on Dennis Connor's team.
Oh.
And when we won the cup back from Australia, we had television cameras in the house, and it was all over television and everything. And he had seen me on the television, and he called and made contact with me, and we got together and we had a dinner in the Milleridge Inn and went over old times just before he moved to Florida. And he's the only one I've been able to get in touch with. There was one other fellow from Lawrence, Massachusetts, who I was up there for a wedding, and I looked him up in the phone book, and I called, and he just sounded so pathetic. He said, "Oh, I'd like to see you, but I'm so sick." And we never got together. That was the closest I came to to another contact. I've looked in military websites and tried to see if there was anything about Corps Evacuation Hospital, and nothing ever showed up anywhere. And one other contact. Our orthopedist from Corps Evacuation Hospital 3 was the orthopedist for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah.
And I was at an orthopedic convention, and he gave a paper of some kind, and I recognized him, and I after the meeting I went up to introduce myself, and he said, "Oh, hello," and that was it. So, yeah, Lenny Geller was the only one I ever really got together with.
How do you think your time in service, I think you probably have answered this already, has changed or affected your life?
Well, what I've often said, it was the most horrible time of my life, but if I had to do it all over again, I would. I think I benefited from it.
Do you think you would have gone to medical school if it wasn't for the GI Bill?
I doubt it, because my family certainly wouldn't have been able to afford to send me. Mm-hmm. And I had taken an aptitude test in high school, and they had recommended that I look for a career in medicine, dentistry, or veterinary medicine. And they recommended the veterinary medicine because it was a shorter course. But I had no idea at all how I would ever have gone to college. And when I graduated high school, I went to work for the Chase National Bank. And well, when I went in the Navy, I withdrew all my connections with the bank, and my bonds and insurances and everything like that, to make sure I wouldn't go back to the bank. And when I found I had the aptitude for medicine, I was able to do that work, and then had the wherewithal to go to college, because at that time the GI Bill paid my whole tuition, my books, and $75 a month besides. That was more than I was making at the bank.
You have some things you brought in?
Oh, yeah.
You can hold them up to the camera and...
I have a couple of pictures when I was in Navy uniform. I didn't have any good pictures from the Marine Corps uniform.
Yeah, if you just hold it up in front of you, like here, it'll...
Yeah,
Wayne will
I
be able
can
to
zoom
focus
in on
in
them.
on it. Now, when were those taken? Do you know about what
This
year?
was taken right after I finished boot camp.
Okay, I got them.
Okay, and then this was taken further on. I was pharmacist mate 3rd class by this time. So this was probably taken just before I left Brooklyn Naval Hospital.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions?
No?
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, I hope it'd be of some interest.
Well, it was very interesting.